Well, it's so good to have Ashton on the show. How you doing today?
I'm doing so well, Keith. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to have you on.
Yeah. I was
I
going to
love.
tell you when we were chatting before we hit record here that Keith was actually my grandfather's name.
Oh,
So
how
when we
unusual.
connected, it was like this special connection. So I'm so happy to be talking to a Keith today.
Well, it's good to have you on too.
Yeah.
I love to ask my guests a question to kind of get us warmed up to get to know you better. So, what's the
Yeah.
best piece of advice you've ever received?
Yeah. So I think it has to do around it's not summed up in like a beautiful quote or anything, but I think like the best sort of like overall advice that I have received is around just like persevering through rejection and that like no one's
Mm.
actually like cares. Like no one like I think we think people are paying attention to us, but like they really aren't, right? People are so involved with their own stuff. So like when you feel like you're being rejected, um honestly, it usually has nothing to do with you. It's like
Mm.
if it's in business world, it's budgets or it's whatever, right? And I think, we are like when we have this like fear, like when we have fears in our life, a lot of it stems from the rejection. Like you're actually like afraid of being rejected, right? It's like someone doesn't like me or they don't like what I'm putting into the world or they disagree with what I have to say or what have you. And like that keeps us small, right? So like just doing whatever you can to like persevere through rejection and not take it personally when possible, like I think just allows you to just be able to have a voice and into the world and being able to continue on what it is that you want to do. Yeah, because you need to speak up about what it is. And that fear of rejection is so incredibly real. And when you feel rejected, it feels like awful, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not a good time when you feel rejected. Yeah.
No, I completely agree with that. No one likes that feeling of rejection. It's a shocking and painful part of life to realize that somebody has chosen not to think you're as important as you would like to be valued. And so, or
Yeah,
somebody once said it, how you want to show up in the world when people don't recognize how you want to show up in the world, that
right.
rejection is really painful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm always curious about entrepreneurs, their story. So tell us your
Mhm.
story.
Yeah, so I am a live illustrator and a visual communication, visual learning educator. So I found out about this like world of visual communication, visual thinking, as a facilitator first. So, and what led me into facilitation was working at a nonprofit family center where I was working with little kids, and then I moved into more of a facilitation role, working with families and parents. And really started to fall in love with facilitation. So when you're in a room, it's not about you, the expert, it's about asking questions, it's about hearing people, feeding back to them their own wisdom, connecting ideas in the room. And I really fell in love with that process. And then 10 years ago, I was introduced into the world of graphic facilitation, which then opened my kind of mind to, what does it mean to draw pictures to help yourself think, to help yourself communicate, to break down complexity. And I started experiencing some of that value for myself when I would add it into facilitated things that I was doing. And I really wanted to once I started like experiencing the benefit and value for myself, I was like, this is pretty incredible. I want to see if I could do this full time. But not very many people are hiring 9 to 5ers for these types of roles. Like, I've only ever come across a handful and over the years. And so honestly, you're kind of just like defaulted into starting a business or working for yourself or being an entrepreneur. So I don't think I ever necessarily ever thought that I would end up working for myself. Like I did follow a bit of more of a traditional path in some senses, but you know, looking back, I know that I was very entrepreneurial in many ways, but I didn't really recognize that's what it was at the time. It wasn't until I started a business and I was like, oh yeah, like I've done these things before. I already have some of these skills. Um, yeah, so I kind of just sort of fell into it because I was so passionate about trying to do this work every day. That I was like, well, I guess I have to start a business, figure that out. So
So as you started this journey, what lessons did you learn along the way? I'm sure with every entrepreneur, you had to overcome some bumps in the road, some setbacks, and then you got some maybe some aha moments. So what did you learn along the way as you started this?
Oh my gosh, I think the thing when I started, I thought it was gonna be very focused on the mechanics, right? Set up this process, invoice this way, set up your contract this way, communicate to clients this way. I thought it was all mechanics. And once I got into it, I realized how the mechanics of running a business is actually like, I don't wanna say it's the easy stuff, but it's like the stuff you can just like figure out. And it's such a small part. The biggest part is your thinking, right? Who you are, how you show up, how you communicate, what you believe you can charge, what you believe you can receive, right? Just believing that you could be successful. So I spent honestly just as much, if not more time doing work on myself than I did on the craft, the visual thinking pieces, the business mechanics, right? I spent more time on how do I think about myself? How do I think about believing if I can succeed, right? Because if you don't believe you can succeed, you won't, right? Like I think it's like Henry Ford is like whatever the quote is like, whether if you believe you're whether you can or you can't, you're right. You know, like that is so true because if you believe that you can do it. But if you're like this isn't going to work for me, that's not going to work for you.
Right. Yeah.
You know, like honestly, it seems so it is a little woo woo for sure, but it is like that's just been my experience that, you know, because I really had a lot of limitations for myself. I never thought I was going to achieve certain things because I didn't follow, like, I don't have a lot of post secondary education, right? So I thought, well, you know, that there's going to be a ceiling for me because I didn't go and pursue a lot of post secondary education. So I thought I'd have a career ceiling. I thought I would have an income ceiling, right? So I had to really deconstruct those things and be like, no, no, like at the end of the day, all this secondary education for what is it that I want to do is like, it doesn't relate, it doesn't matter, right? And the number of clients that have ever asked me in like a process of like hiring me, what is your post secondary education? Because we might not hire you if it's not good enough. Zero.
Right.
Zero. Zero people have said to me, "What is your post-sec?" They want to know my journey, like your question, like how in the world did you end up here? Right? But that's a very different question than what is your formal education? You know, well, I'm not going to take you seriously if you don't. And I think that was one of the things I had to deconstruct as well. So, very long-winded answer to your question.
No,
But
but it's
honestly,
important
that
because I
was
think
it.
so
Thank
many
you.
people I think so many people run into that. They think that they need a certain expertise, a certain educational background to achieve
Mhm.
certain things. And so they go pursue that only to find out that that wasn't necessarily what they needed. They needed more of the understanding who they were, their journey, what they're offering to the world, and showing up in a very real way to offer that to the world versus I
Yeah,
need this background to accomplish that.
absolutely.
You're going to mess up all the educational schools with that philosophy though.
And I honestly, I feel like a total weirdo because like my husband and I talk about like the kids. Like I have 3 children and I'm like, we don't even know what the world is going to look like by the time they are going to be done high school going into the world. No idea. Like who would have ever thought influencer was going to be a job? Like Like, I was
Right.
like I'm not even that old. I'm, like, not 40 yet, and I'm like, these like, social media wasn't even a thing when I was in high school, right? Let alone all these other careers and AI and all this stuff, right? So, like, I definitely feel like, you know, I'm gonna just encourage my kids to do whatever it is that they wanna do, and that, like, they can make money in so many different ways, and if that involves post-secondary education, cool, and if not, that's fine too, because, like, my husband also runs a business. He also doesn't have a lot of formal education. We were high school sweethearts, we went to local community college together, and, like, and there's I hopefully it's better, but there was a lot of stigma because, like, the not smart kids go to community college, and I had people tell me, "Oh, you seem so smart for someone who goes to community college," and I'm like, "Yeah, I know, I am smart, thank you very much." Because I chose to go to community college, right? And it's just because my I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I didn't want to go and, I didn't have money set aside for me from my parents. Like, I knew I was going to have to take out crazy loans and I didn't want to put myself in financial distress at like 18, right? So I was like, I'm just going to like wait it out and see if anything comes up that I might want to do. Um, and so I chose the path of like early childhood education in the education that I do have because I knew I wanted to be a mom at some point. So, like when people would say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I would just tell them I want to be a mother. And they were like, "What?" Like the fact that I didn't want to have a career, like not that I didn't want to have a career, I just didn't know what that career would be. I almost became a sign language interpreter. I almost
Ooh.
followed that path. Very close to that. Um, it's interesting though, because there's like this thread throughout my life, which I didn't even realize until a couple of years ago, of like, I've always been a communicator or help people communicate. That's why I really love facilitation. Why I think I almost became a sign language interpreter in what it is that I do now. It's like helping people communicate. Right. So, but like, how do you even know what jobs are available for this very like specific thing, like helping people communicate? Like, what does that mean? You know?
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned the term I want to kind of have you dig down or explain more to us. You
Mm,
mentioned the term live illustration. So what is
right.
live illustration?
Yeah. So, I work with nonprofits or businesses or large companies, and when they are having a conference or a meeting or some sort of strategic planning session, basically wherever people are either talking or someone is talking at them, like in a presentation, I am there when am there physically, I'm usually there with paper and markers. And when I'm virtually, I'm usually drawing on this big screen that I have in real time, the conversation, right? So I'm listening for those key ideas, those messages, those little anecdotes, those stories, and using a combination of words and drawings to elevate those messages or ideas or help connect those pieces of conversation in a room. So, yeah, live. And the reason why it's live is because people can hear what's going on, they can see what it is that I'm doing, what's going on, and get that extra learning or that extra clarification. Um, and so on. So yeah, that's sort of in a nutshell. That's what it is that I do.
I've actually seen that. I was at a conference once where there was someone doing
Awesome.
what you did, and they kind of created the entire presentation on a storyboard type format. So you could kind of see what you said you mentioned with drawings and with words, kind of the
Awesome.
entire presentation
Yeah.
reviewed in this storyboard. And for me, who's a visual person, I
Yeah.
remember that much more than the words, the talkie. And the funny thing is,
Yeah.
I'm a pastor, so I understand the talkie part.
Mm.
But I
Yeah.
also understand that everybody doesn't learn just from being verbally talked at. So I love the
Yeah.
idea of how you put that presentation into a visual illustration for us to kind of, for those who us who are visual people to be able to kind
Right.
of connect with.
Right. Yeah, and I love that you had that experience with it because it's so much easier for someone to understand what it is when they've seen it before. Right? You'd be like, oh, you know, so like I was talking to someone not that long ago and they're like, I saw this 10 years ago. And like they remember it. And that speaks to the value. You know, you may not remember all the details from that event, but you remember there was a graphic, and I'm sure you could dig it up in your files and find a photograph of it. It will take you back to that conversation even all those years later. I'm always so fascinated to hear how people use them after an event as well in their marketing or in their meetings and all of, you know, using it as an accountability tool. I think it's a really beautiful thing. And of course, like, you know, I'm still also very surprised when I come across people who have never experienced it before. So I'm glad that you have and that you had a great experience with it. Um, yeah, because when you're just in that world, like every day, you think like everyone knows this, right? But that's not the
Right.
case. Yeah.
So you mentioned, doing that for companies and especially groups. So give me kind of your best piece of how you've seen a company or a business use this tool to help their company or their business be better organized or even to communicate something they want to communicate to their employees.
I think it's one of those things that you get from it what you put into it, right? So I've certainly been in situations where like I feel like maybe they didn't really know why I was there and I just do it and I leave and like here's your picture and they're like okay and then see you later. But the ones that really get a lot more benefit and value out of it have conversations with me and I can suggest different ways to use it after. You know, I've had a few businesses work with me where they like put it on a wall and they wrote on it too, right? So you can't like always treat it like a piece of artwork, right? And that's this like really difficult thing because it has to be aesthetically pleasing. It has to like look decent and nice that you want to look at it. And like the handwriting is clean, you can read it, you know, like those pieces are important. But I almost like think I'm doing people disservice sometimes when I make it like too pretty because then they think then they treat it like a piece of artwork, right? And sometimes in those situations where it's like you can use it in your business, if it's strategic planning or you're like got action items on it, like I encourage people like put it on the wall and like write on it, draw on it, or if you don't want to do that, like put sticky notes on it, like interact with it so that you get more benefit from it overall, but then also like the people in your organization can see action. Because that's like the hardest thing I think sometimes when we're in these types of meetings and you're talking about all this amazing stuff. And then people go off behind the scenes and go and do some of this work, but you don't always see that in action, right? And then you've got like maybe lower level employees looking up to the senior people and they're like, what are those people doing all day? They're like sitting in that big fancy office, but what the heck are they doing, right? So I think it's I think it's like a transparency opportunity, it's an accountability opportunity. It's like I've had people say, we want to know even if you can't do something. We want to put out suggestions and we want to make sure that you hear us, but we want to know that even if you cannot do something that you're communicating that to us, right? So, you know, you could use the visual that was created as a way to help communicate the good and potentially like not so good of saying, we looked into this, we heard you, we looked into it, we can't do it, this is why, right? And being able to use it to help continue on the conversation. And usually that's what I'll say to people at the end. I'll give them their graphic if I'm in person. I'll be like, I hope this helps you continue this conversation, right? They don't know what it
Right.
is. You know, there's a philosophy behind what it is that I'm saying. They were just like, "Oh, that's a cute thing she said." But, you know, for me, it's like I'm like passing the baton. Like we started this together. Now go forth and continue it, please. Don't let this just be a moment in time. And I think that's why people have such a hard time with meetings and things because a lot of times they are just a moment in time, right? And then we equate that moment in time because there was no follow through. There was no, okay, what came from that meeting, right?
Right.
Yeah. Then people go, oh, that was a waste of time. Even if
Right.
maybe stuff is happening, but you don't see it, right? Or you don't know that people are working on stuff.
So you mentioned this idea of sketchnoting. You just talked about meetings. And how those can, drawing notes, how it can help you improve your learning and your memory retention. Um, so tell me how that works, because I doodle sometimes in meetings too. Usually I'm doodling, it had nothing to do
Awesome.
with the meeting.
Yeah,
so
I love
so
that.
how do you focus doodle so
Yeah.
you have retention for your meeting?
Honestly, I feel like I am such a fan of the doodle. Like if someone my mother was actually telling me the other day that she was talking to someone and they had just made the connect because I also knew this woman too, but she had just made the connection that we were like mother and daughter and she didn't know that. And she was like, "Oh my gosh, right, Ashton, the doodler." Right? And I think when people call me the like a doodler, um I take it as like a sign of endearment, right? Like,
Sure.
whereas the doodling has gotten such a bad reputation, that I could be very easily offended, right? Like if you're like, "Oh, well, like and people don't want to admit. It's like, "Well, I doodle. I doodle in my notes," right? Because it's seen as something not serious. And that might be a very serious meeting that you're in, so you have to be serious, right? You can't be
Right.
caught doodling for goodness sakes, right? So, doodling is a beautiful gateway to visual communication. Doodling in its own right will help you remember up to 29% more information. So it's doing the opposite of what it has a bad reputation for. People think it's taking away focus, whereas actually helping you keep focus. And Sunny Brown, who wrote this awesome book called The Doodle Revolution, she has like a 7-minute TED talk. She talks so fast, but she helps like reframe and talk about why the doodling is so amazing. And I love she's just awesome. You can look her up. And it's really about like looking at it as a stepping stone to visual communication. So, like, sometimes for fun, I'll call myself a professional doodler just because it's an interesting, like, what do you mean you're a professional doodler? Like, how is that? Like my dad made me explain at Thanksgiving to my uncle what it is that I do because he said every time I try to explain it to someone, people go, and she makes money doing that?
Yeah.
It's like you couldn't possibly, like, have a business or, like, make money, like, doodling, like, that's not a thing, is it? Um, so doodling in its own right is amazing, and I highly encourage people to do it. I think it's incredible. But you could, exactly what you said, take those doodles and make them work for you a little bit. Get more like benefit from them, right? So I call it like doodling with purpose. So that's where sketchnoting or visual note taking comes in. And honestly, it's taking all the skill set that I use as a professional and doing it more small scale for yourself. So when I'm a professional, I'm listening as a like for everyone. I'm like the listening for the room. I'm listening for the meeting. I'm like picking up on little nuances. I'm looking at people's heads nodding. I'm listening and looking for these things. But when you're sketchnoting or doing it for yourself, you don't have to be so like holistic about it. Right? You can go, what's resonating with me right now? What do I hear? Right? What made me just go, "Oh, that's interesting." Right? So capture things that relate and mean something to you because it's going to help you understand it and remember it deeper or be able to communicate that later to people, right? So a lot of the same skill sets. It's just a matter of like, who are you listening for lots of people, for yourself? And, is it large on a wall or is it small in like a little notebook? Um, but a lot of the same like sort of philosophy kind of going into it. Yeah.
Love it. What about those people who say they're not creative? What advice do you have for them?
Oh my goodness. It is such a funny thing. I feel like this has been like the hottest topic I've been talking about all year. And I like people think they're not creative. And if you, for some reason, people have this really strong emotional response when it comes to, I'm not creative. Right? Or I am creative. Or you say that they are and they're like, "Oh goodness, I could. No, I'm not could possibly. I'm not creative. That's for those people, but it's not for me." Right? I'm like, "Well, who are those people that are creative? Like, what is this?" Right? So, um, why do we believe anything in life? right? Because someone told us something, right? Or we have faith in something, right? So if someone said to you at some point, you're painting wrong, which is what my grade 4 teacher said to me. My little grade 4 mind, 9-year-old Ashton went, oh, I can't paint, right? So luckily I was very creative in a lot of other ways. So I didn't paint for a long, long, long time, for like 15, 16 years, until I found a folk artist that I really loved and fell in love with locally here. And so, we believe things for a variety of different reasons. And I think for some reason, when someone is told even like the slightest little comment or something around them that they're internalizing, right? Even just someone saying like, "Oh, that person is going to art school, haha, they're gonna graduate and they won't have a job," right? Even just hearing those things and being around that kind of rhetoric, I think like you internalize, oh, well, I'm not going to be accepted into society if I pursue creativity as like a potential work by going to art school, right? So, like, I think there's just these funny little things that we encounter throughout our life, um, where we're told we're not something, like we're told we're not creative. And it could have been like the slightest, tiniest comment that maybe you remember, maybe you don't. Right. So I think it's about taking back ownership of our creativity and expressing it in a way that works for us. Right. Maybe it's not like, for me, it's very visual, right? I'm a visual artist, like I'm drawing, like I'm doing stuff like that. But it does not have to be limited to that. It could be being a good storyteller, which I'm sure that you are. I'm just guessing that you are,
Yeah,
right?
probably.
Probably, not to toot your own horn, but maybe you're really good at making people laugh. Maybe you uh can play an instrument. Like it doesn't have to necessarily fall under like a stereotypical sense of what creativity is or what it looks like. Um, but just finding what that creative spin looks like for you and trying on different creative hats and seeing which one feels right. But I think most people don't do even just that, like experimentation of like what is my creative outlook look like. Um, and as the world is progressing, and like I work a lot in like tech spaces, and honestly, I've just been hearing the same thing for years now, is that in workplaces, people want creative thinkers, right? So if you could not have any, going back to our conversation about formal education, you could probably get away with not having a lot of formal education. But if you did things that allowed you to like think creatively, you're like a unique problem solver, those skill sets are going to be highly sought after when you go into the workplace. If it is that you want to work for yourself or you want to work for somebody else or whatever that looks like for you, um, those are very, very highly valuable skill sets, right? And you only get them by putting yourself into creative situations. Like I'm even like deconstructing this like sports versus creative energy because I've always been so like poo poo sports. But there is like some overlap with creativity and sports. Like, sports is very like structured, but a lot of creative things aren't structured. But there's still a lot of values and experiences that you can get from both that overlap, right? So it doesn't have to be, for me. Throughout my life, it's just been like one or the other. Yeah, either
Right.
sportsy or you're creative, right? So for me, I'm actually trying to deconstruct that a little bit so I don't have so much negativity towards um, physical stuff, like the physicality of sports and things like that. Just whereas like you might not always resonate with something creatively, right? Like I watched this documentary years ago. I'd like to rewatch it. It's called Wasteland. And it's about this artist who goes down to Rio de Janeiro, is like working with these people who like live in like the dump or whatever. And he's making art out of garbage. And one of the guys there, he said, I don't understand art, and I just don't like it. I don't understand it. And the artist said to him, so Are you meaning to tell me that you don't like things you don't understand? And that always really stuck with me because I think that's how a lot of people view creativity and art in general, is like, if you don't get it, then you internalize that you don't like it because you don't understand it. Because when you don't understand something, you feel stupid, right? No one likes to feel stupid, right? So you're like, I don't get art. Like, you go to an art gallery and like, I don't get it, which equals I don't like it because it makes me feel bad,
Right.
right? Yeah.
You said something I want to go back to because I think a lot of people run into what you just mentioned. Having that person maybe in school or even a family member who may not have negative intent, but they criticize your creativity, and so it stops you from exploring something that you may really love. It happened to me
Yeah.
with writing when I was younger. Someone said you're not a good
Yeah.
writer
There you
or you
go.
can't write. And so I
Mhm.
didn't write for 20, 30 years, really, not
Yeah.
seriously. And then all of a sudden I picked it up in my 50s and wrote a book, and people loved it. And it was like, but I go back and wonder what could have been if I
Mm.
had, for the last, 40 years or so, written. What could I have
Yeah.
accomplished if I hadn't listened to the voice saying, you don't know what you're doing, or that's not pretty?
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
a lot of people may be creative, but they've been told somewhere in their life that the thing that they maybe actually could be good at, if they worked on it, it's not good enough. And so
Yeah.
I would encourage people, be careful when you pour into people's life negative words about what they're doing. It's
Mhm.
easier
Mhm.
to uplift them and just encourage them versus saying,
Yeah.
oh, that's not good enough. Everybody's not going to paint like Picasso, or
Mhm.
no one appreciated Picasso probably at the time. They do now,
Mhm.
but or you may not play like Mozart. So give people the opportunity to grow in that space instead of giving them input that may really crush the heart and soul of someone who really is creative.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah, and I think that's like you said the key words like unintentional, right? It's not like you like people didn't mean to. And like now that I'm on the other side right now of like teaching a lot of people how to like let's go back to the doodle, like let's draw a line, let's draw a square, and how does that relate to what you can capture for information? I'm very careful about critiquing when someone doesn't ask me to critique. Right. Cause
Right.
like I want to be helpful. I want to provide feedback. Like they're learning, they're growing. But unless someone specifically says, like, I didn't know what to do here for color. I didn't know how to draw this thing, right? Can you help? Can you give me advice for next time? Like, whatever. Like, I'll comment on things that are doing really well. But I'm really careful not to just I think people just generally want to be helpful. So then they critique without necessarily like knowing that even if somebody wants to be like, you're like, what kind of feedback are you looking for here? Is usually like what I'll ask, right?
Right.
Or I'll preface them like, I'm only going to give you great feedback. I'm only going to say amazing things. I'm going to be your cheerleader here. If you want me to say something a little bit more critiquing, I will do that, but I'm not going to just say it, right? So I'm very careful about that. And I think we need to almost like get into a habit more when someone is like talking to us about something that's going on in their life. I'm like, do you want me just to listen here? Do you want me to provide advice? Because it's a totally different vibe. And you're going to listen a little bit differently potentially to them, right? And how do they need to be listened to in that moment? Um, do they want to just listen I just need to get this off my chest and then in 5 minutes I'll be fine. I just need to like breathe. Or are you looking for like advice here? And I think because we are just naturally want to help people, we just jump to giving people advice um, when they might not actually want it. Right. And
Right.
then you could get into this like unfortunate situation where you're like critiquing them on something that they didn't want to be critiqued at. And it could be something creative.
Right. I'm curious, what are you excited about in this season of your life?
Yeah, I am really excited. I am excited about being on the other side as like a teacher of this, and I've been spending a lot more time thinking about what I'm thinking about, right? So like a lot of the things that I just shared with you are things that I've been thinking a lot about this year. And I think I got really just kind of sucked into the work and running a business and getting clients and doing good work. I think I got sucked into that for many, many years. And now I'm just sort of like taking a step back, I want to like regain some of creative energy for myself. So I'm not just like giving it all away or selling it basically.
Right.
Right. So, you know, when people ask me like, what's your balance? I'm like, I don't have one. That's the problem. Right. So, and because you have to be creative, like in an instant, like on a dime, like and potentially like all day long, it's very exhausting, physically, emotionally. It's very draining. So I'm excited about being in this new space I want to move forward in, is like still really excited about doing this work. But I know if I travel down this path any longer and not have something else that is challenging me, or that I'm thinking a lot more about what I'm thinking about, that I definitely will be on the road to burnout for sure. I know I will be. So I'm excited about regaining some of that for myself and just stepping back, to see how I can also help people learn the skill for themselves and do a lot of thinking about that. Um, you know, because that just kind of grows the community too, right? And it takes the importance off of me of like, oh, well, I am the illustrator, so you must work with me. I'm like, no, no, I'll teach you how to do it so you can do it too. Right.
Right.
But you have to have a very like abundance mindset when it comes to that as well. Because like some people will learn it to do it for themselves, but then some of those people might end up like loving it so much, like me 10 years ago, that wanted to create their own business. And I think like being in a more than merrier kind of approach to the work, I think is really important.
That's excellent. I love to ask my guests this question. What do you want your legacy in the world to be?
Um, yeah, so I think past Ashton would answer this question with something very grandiose, right? I used to do a lot of like community artwork. I like started an art festival. I started an arts organization, and some of those things died off with COVID. I was feeling very burnt out from those things. So I think past Ashton would say something with that, like, you know, I want to be known like in my community for doing like great community work and doing all that stuff. But I think since then, honestly, I want my legacy in the world to be like, she was a lovely person who cared about her community. She cared about her family, and she was just like a cool chick. I think that would be a great legacy, to be honest
It
with
would
people.
be.
I think that's all right. And like, you know, if my great great grandchildren, they'll be like, oh my gosh, did you hear about great great mother Ashton? Like apparently she was like awesome. Like I think that would be a great legacy. Like I think to be like she like was an artist, like it was so cool and she was doing all this stuff. Like I think that would be pretty awesome. I think we put like a lot of pressure. Like we have to have this like big grandiose thing that we want people to remember us for, which to me is like, I think I chased that sort of like external sort of validation for a long time. But I think just being like remembered for being someone who was really kind and really loving, um, and loved hard and loved well about the things that she cared about and the people around her, I think that in itself is a good legacy.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
So where can my listeners find your website and connect with you on social media?
Yeah, so a couple of different ways. So I have sort of two spaces where mindsedcreative.ca is like my portfolio for like my professional live illustration work. And then sketchnote.school is all things related to learning how to write, draw your own notes, sketchnote, visual note taking. So yeah, I'm pretty findable. Ashton Rodenhiser is a bit of a unique name, so I'm pretty easy
Yeah.
to find. You just like type in my name and it will take you to lots of places. But I'm hanging out on Instagram a lot more these days. And that's Ashton Mind's Eye. That's usually, yeah, I was hanging out on some other channels, but Instagram seems to be the one I'm spending a little bit more time on these days. But um, yeah, so those are the primary ways that people can reach out to me.
Well, Ashton, thanks so much for this great conversation and blessings on what you do. I think you offer an opportunity for people to tap into their creative senses and to learn to really kind of let that part of their body flow. I remember hearing a a presentation from Brene Brown talking about the need for us to be able to play more, and
I love
to
that.
release
Yeah,
that creative part of us. That if we don't do that as much, we don't learn to play more, we end up being kind of more people who aren't as vulnerable and as healthy
right.
as we could be. So what you do
Absolutely.
helps us to learn to play. And I
I
love
love
that. We need
that.
to learn to
Yeah.
play.
Yeah, huge fan of Brene Brown. Shout out to her. She's awesome. But yeah. Yeah, if I can just like channel just a tiny bit of her energy, that would be amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ashton. Thanks. We appreciate you being
Yeah.
on.
No problem. Thanks so much for having me.